Hi there, my name is Bhishma. Today I'll try out something a bit different. This is not a review of the Bambu Lab A1 Mini, but rather why I think that every household, at least every household in Singapore, should have a 3D printer at home. The first obvious reason is space. So growing up, I was fortunate to have the luxury of space as I grew up in Johor, which meant that I could make things, make noise and everything else under the sun without worry. However, since moving to Singapore, things are a little different here. Space is definitely of the luxury, and making things isn't always suitable or practical in the more DIY scene. Of course, yes, I have seen people with their own studios, their own makerspace and all that at home, but if you're talking about woodworking and all that, then things get a little bit harder. Yeah. So with a 3D printer like this, so you can see this is the Bambu Lab A1 Mini. It's on the more compact side of 3D printers, but it gets the job done. In fact, most of my 3D prints have been on the smaller side. Hence, a 3D printer of this size is quite sufficient to make a lot of things. And especially if you're a person who maybe is renting a room, or maybe your apartment is one bedroom or a two bedroom, something like that. Obviously, you couldn't have an entire suite of tools or even machinery to do your DIY projects, and like a 3D printer like this is actually pretty awesome. And there is a video by Pat Yujan, you can look somewhere, link it up here, that he actually explained the same thing, whereby growing up he was sort of a maker, but a more hands-on maker, but as he grew up he didn't have the space, as he moved into the city and he didn't have the space to have a whole huge to have huge appliances or power tools and all that, and he felt that the 3D printer could get the job done, especially if you're just creating small stuff or more personal items. The 3D printer is there. With a small device like this, you could create a lot of different things. So like, for example, I look here. So this is just for me to store my battery. Of course, you probably could buy something like this off the shelf. I haven't actually come across any, but to create something small like this, it doesn't take much time and you can do it in the comfort of your own home. And I think that's a great reason. And the second one is noise. So realistically, with most hobbies, or if you are into like woodworking, or if you are into making clay pots or something like that, noise is a concern, especially if you are living in an apartment. You wouldn't want to annoy the shit out of your neighbors or even your roommates. And so something like this it does still have a bit of noise, but it's not to the point where you couldn't tune it out. So like the Bambu Lab A1 Mini, it is pretty quiet in the grand scheme of things. And imagine a tool where you could create things and that isn't that loud. I think that's a win, especially in an environment like Singapore. The third reason is, of course, cost and accessibility. You aren't a maker, if you're a technical person, or if you're not the kind of person if you're the kind of person who thinks that a 3D printer is a novelty, it's just for those engineers or for architects or interior designers and all that. No, I do not believe that that's true, and I feel that the cost of 3D printers have come down significantly. So for like this Bambu Lab A1 Mini is about $199 US, so I think it's about 200 something Singaporean dollars, which, to be honest, I've seen people spend more on Pokemon cards than that. So $200 is a great start for you to create things that probably worth quite a bit. So for example, let's say I wanted a way to hold my old phone. So this is a Pixel 3. So tend to upcycle, or don't get rid of your phone, so I don't throw it away. I could repurpose it. So like this, there's a dock for the phone. You could show the time, you could show some slideshows and all that, or some photos. So this was created by somebody. I took this from Maker World, and yeah, I don't think you could ever purchase something like this off the shelf. So creating something like this is actually quite is a good showcase of making a product that is, one, cost effective, as well as serves a purpose. And 3D printers have not only come down in terms of price, but also have come down in terms of complexity and ease of use. So like, for example, this 3D printer, like I I was fortunate to experience three distinct timelines of 3D printing. The first being somewhere around 2016, I got my first printer. That was an Easy 3D Nano. So it's a very basic, cheap desktop 3D printer. It did get the job done, and it did make me explore more on 3D printing. Of course, it was very slow. It was very clunky and very difficult to operate. And moving forward, I upgraded to a Creality Ender 3 V2, and of course I used that for quite a while, couple of years, and I also had, because I also had the luxury of space back in Malaysia, so I was I could use it for a couple of years. But eventually I moved to Singapore. I needed something a little different, as I couldn't bring along that. I got this instead, and this is mind-blowing. Not only was the setup easy, but also hardly anything ever goes wrong, and even if it does, it's not that hard to diagnose and fix. So I feel that this generation, or the generation of 3D printers moving forward, is definitely much easier to use, much more versatile. And believe it or not, even my wife, who isn't a tech person by any means, could create something like this on her own. I think that shows that the entry, or the level of entry to 3D printing is pretty much lower than ever. So before I end, 3D printing, to me at least, should be how desktop computers were. People started out saying that, oh, this huge clunky thing is not going to take off, but they were wrong. Desktop computers were essential to every household, and and of course, as years progress, desktop computers have shrinked. People are now using laptops, smartphones, and all that. But the desktop computer idea, where every household should have a desktop computer, should also be applied to 3D printers. This gives the room, or the freedom of creativity to kids, especially. Now kids are growing up without much access to hands-on like woodworking and all that, and I think a 3D printer could bridge that gap, or at least fill in the gap to a certain degree. And I feel that 3D printing should be a norm in most households. And also, like Singapore, where space is a huge luxury, custom-made products or custom-made designs is actually a good thing. So for example, if you look up this project called Gridfinity, right? So it's where you can create custom compartments like these that go on to a specific grid, and you can create all kinds of shapes and sizes to to store specific items. And I think those kind of solutions, or those kind of open source solutions, are great to push 3D printing up, to make it more common, or to make it more accessible to solutions like that, or custom-made solutions, are getting more popular. And if you are the kind of person who doesn't really want to give in into what's on sale out there, I think something like this is a huge thing for you to consider. So yeah, those are my reasons on why every household in Singapore should have a 3D printer. And this is me, Bishma, signing off, and I'll see you in another video.